Welcome to Bods, Crabcakes, and Sports, where husky middle-aged men share insight on the latest Baltimore sports news. From the bank to the yard and beyond, we're breaking down the Ravens, Orioles, Terps, and more. Baltimore's best sports podcast starts right now.
Good afternoon and welcome to Dad Bod, Crabcakes, and Sports. Jason and Mike here with a very, very special guest. We are lucky enough to have longtime Orioles beat writer, Baltimore Sun columnist, and I might miss something else. Let's see, former president of the Baseball Writers Association. I don't know, Peter, I might have missed something, but Mr. Peter Schmuck is joining us here. Peter, how are you doing today?
Good. I'm currently with BaltimoreBaseball.com.
That's correct. Missed that one too. And now you are, if I understand, you were 30 years with the Baltimore Sun, and now you are currently retired part-time working for BaltimoreBaseball.com.
Yep. Also spent 11 years covering the Angels and Dodgers in California.
Absolutely. That's terrific. Well, the most important question that we have you on here for is this is called Dad Bods, Crabcakes and Sports, specifically the Dad Bods point. And Mike and I have worked very hard on our Dad Bods. So I need to know, what is your favorite snack over the years, Peter?
My favorite snack is Cheetos.
Man, that's a good one though.
Yes.
We haven't got Cheetos yet, Mike. That's a really good one.
No, that's a new one. I love it.
That's
great.
Either Cheetos or Pirates Booty. They're both sort of the same thing, but yeah, I like Puffs.
One makes your hands orange, the other doesn't, I guess. So you have that going. Oh, man. Well, Peter, again, thank you very much for giving us the time today. Yeah, I mean, you basically said it. You got your start, I believe, out on the West Coast. You're originally from the West Coast, and you worked for started with the Dodgers, actually right at their World Series year. And was that 81?
In 81. Actually, I started the year before with the Angels for 1 year, where I was hopelessly overmatched against two future Hall of Fame writers, Tracy Ringlesby and Ross Newhand. But I learned a lot that year, and then got, and this sounds strange, but got demoted to the Dodgers because I worked at the Orange County Register. That's where the Angels play, obviously. So the Dodgers were the secondary beat, and it was like the best thing that ever happened to me. And the first year started with Fernando Mania, was interrupted by the baseball strike, the longest baseball strike until 94, 95. And then the Dodgers win a place in the split season playoffs and come from behind in all three playoff series to win the world title. It was quite a year, quite an education. And the 3 years with the Dodgers, since my wife's not listening, they're the best 3 years of my life.
Risky.
Yeah. So Peter, I know you've been in covering Baltimore sports for a long time now, and from the days of typewriters and phone booths and all that kind of stuff, right? And things have evolved technology wise, but to you, what is the single biggest change in how you cover a baseball team now? And what part of your job do you miss the most from like the good old days of maybe back when you started?
Well, first off, covering baseball with a typewriter was not much fun. And that first year with the Angels and the Dodgers, I wrote on a typewriter, and we used the primitive fax machines. They were called Quips. I don't know, you guys probably aren't even old enough to remember the commercials for Quip. And it was a machine that you put the paper in. I carried one around on the road. It was a big giant suitcase that weighed about 40 pounds. And I had to schlep it around on the road along with my briefcase, my suitcase, and a typewriter, of course. And you stuffed a piece of a page of your copy, or you put it on a roller inside it, and it had a little sensor. It took 6 minutes for it to roll, and the sensor would go on, and it had a thing you stuck your phone into, a phone receptacle, and it was awful. I mean, it seemed like it was better than what we had before, but what we had before was to hand your paper off to some service in every post box, and they found a way to send it. And the other thing was, if it slipped out, it would just destroy the paper. You have to type the paper over again to put it back in. So got so bad at one point that during the first ever division series, when Dodgers went down 2-0 to the Houston Astros in 81, I got so mad and so frustrated that I threw my typewriter against the wall at the at the Hilton Hotel in Houston and destroyed it. And then it was like mid-afternoon on the off day, and I had to go out into town and find a shop and buy a new typewriter and go back and then start completely over again. And that taught me a lesson about controlling my temper, believe it or not. It really did, because I realized that venting your temper in that situation was so self-defeating that I never forgot the lesson I got from that.
You covered the Dodgers initially in the early 80s. What was your favorite part about that entire experience? I've heard rumors of first bars on airplanes and walking out of bungalows onto the practice fields. I've also heard room service and fancy hotels. I mean, you tell me.
Well, that's all true. It was a very different experience for a 25-year-old kid. Grew up in a poor family. Went to the state college, Cal State Fullerton, which I like to call the Harvard of the Pacific. Let me describe to you me being put on the Dodgers. I arrive at LA Airport to join the Dodgers at spring training, and knew some of the people because I did fill in occasionally back up on a Dodger game. It wasn't like they were all complete strangers, and knew a bit of the media. But you get on, you're in the concourse, and then I really didn't see the plane until you get on the plane, which they owned. And every seat is a first class seat, and your seat has your name on it. A real label with your name on it. It's like built into the seat. And next to the seats, the two seats on each side, were a little closet. Everybody had a little tiny closet where you could leave your blaster, if you had a blaster, and headphones, your books, a lot of the stuff you could leave on the plane all year long. The things you never had to take off and on the plane for the whole season. And then it was just totally first class. The food was great. There was not a bar on the plane, but the players kind of created their own bar, and it was, and so there was a bit of drinking on the plane. I don't remember my years of ever having like an altercation on the plane, but there were those on several teams over those years, because everyone that had gone to charters were going to charters. Up to that point, they flew commercial usually and just booked a big chunk of the plane. Even with the Angels, in 1980, when we came back from New York from playing the Yankees, it was in the 747, and the Orioles had booked the entire first class cabin and the upstairs. They had an upstairs cocktail lounge in those planes, and so that was quite luxurious, and the food was terrific. And the Dodgers, it was just so easy, so nice, and they were such a first class organization that you couldn't help but have a good time. We did spend a few too many late nights. You can see it in the wrinkles around my eyes. We spent a lot of time getting to know the National League cities, and there was a year, and those 3 years, there was a year where we went out every night on the road after the game, and caroused. And so it was really great fun. I gained a little weight in those 3 years. I had previously been in pretty good shape. And then the Dodgers ended up losing in 83 to the Phillies in the playoffs after having an 11-1 record against the Phillies. And at the end of that season, I was getting married. And so coincidentally, I thought, my boss said, "You did such a good job on the Dodgers that we're promoting you to the Angels." And I'm going, please don't do that. Please give that promotion to some other deserving employee. No, this is our main beat, and you have to do it. And so I was an Angel fan growing up, so that part of it wasn't a big problem. The postscript to this particular situation is that I was, of course, not thrilled to be making the switch. And later, several years later, I was at a going away party for my boss. And I was talking to him, and I was like, congratulating him on his career. And we had started out, he was a real tough boss, and turned out he really turned me into a reporter. So I really appreciated the toughness later. And I said, I only had one complaint the whole time I worked for you, is when you transferred me from the Dodgers to the Angels. And he goes, I didn't move you from the Dodgers to the Angels. Your wife did. I'm going, what? Yeah, right before you got married, my wife worked at the paper, came in and said, he's having too much fun. And I really would appreciate it if you would move him over to the Angels, because he knew the Angels writers were all an older group I wouldn't be able to really hang with. And so I found that out, and I stalked home. My wife continues to deny that. She claims it never happened, but it's so her, so I know it did.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah. There has to be some truth in there somewhere. And you said 1983, which is coincidentally is the year I was born, and I was 3 months old. I was 3 months old when the Orioles won their last World Series, and so I'm clamoring for another one. But over your decades of covering, and it doesn't just have to be the Orioles; it can be the Dodgers or the Angels. So over your decades of covering sports, 4+ decades, what was the most difficult story that you had to pen or to write, whether it was due to controversy or maybe some emotional involvement that you have with a player, or just a personal connection maybe to somebody in your time as a sports writer?
Donnie Moore. That's easy. I hate to say that. It's easy. I knew that guy. I liked that guy. And in '89, when we were at the Sky Dome for the first year that Rogers Center was open, and we were enjoying Sky Dome because it was the first stadium that the press room was a McDonald's franchise, which was really weird. But I'm not making that up. That they had a little McDonald's. They were a big sponsor, and when you went for your pregame meal, you just went up and ordered whatever, same normal McDonald's menu, Big Macs and stuff like that, which wasn't really good for you. But we really loved Sky Dome, loved Toronto, and then in 6th inning of a night game, the PR guy gathers us around and says that Donnie Moore's dead, and then you find the whole story. And I mean, he killed himself. His kids one of his kids was in the room when he shot himself. He shot his wife, and it wasn't so much that Donnie, being a volatile guy, was out of character, but he was a nice guy, and it's just his life had just fallen apart, and he just there's no explaining it. It's just that my kids played with his kids in spring training. He and I had a special relationship, and it immediately took me back to 2 years earlier, a year after he'd given up that momentous home run. And you know what? Lots of people have given up momentous home runs in the playoffs and World Series, but the fans didn't take it well because the Angels had never been to the World Series. And so they were up 3-1 and had a 3-run lead in the 9th, and he blew that lead. And so the following year, there was another tragedy at Anaheim Stadium, not another, where during a night game, some drunk teenage fan climbed up on one of the walkways on the 3rd deck, lost his balance, and fell to his death. And so we get a call from the office. We hear, they're on a police scanner. We hear this. We're in the press box. We hear about this. So now all hands on deck. I have to go out and cover this story. And so I leave the game to whoever was my backup then. I can't even remember because the story at the time was such a crazy thing. And I go out and I interview people outside, and fans that saw it, and then the game ends, and I head back in, and there's nothing to do upstairs yet. I was really relaying stuff into the office. They were kind of writing. It was one of those things we do where one person gathers and somebody else writes. And I walked into the clubhouse, and there were a few players left in the clubhouse by the time I got in there. And one of them was Donnie, who's sitting across the room. And he kind of waves to me. He goes, Schmuck, come on over here. And I walked over, and he said, "Do you hear about that guy that jumped off the roof?" And I said, "Yeah, Donnie, this was awful." He goes, "That was my last fan." And there was quite the same silence that wasn't his, no, it's not literally his last fan. That was his dark humor.
Yes.
And I told that story. I told that story on a documentary about Donnie Moore, and a network thing a few years later, and they didn't use it. I watched it, and it got cut. It went to the cutting room floor. Maybe it's because they probably thought the same way you did. You have to stop and think about it. Like, was it really somebody he knew? No, of course not. I mean, but it was just such a moment, that this is where this guy's head was at. Now, that didn't tell me then, hey, this is really bad and something's going to happen to him, and he's going to go into depression, and going to have family problems, and he's going to have financial problems. But it was just such a sad story, and that's why I didn't even have to stop and think about, when you asked me. There have been other difficult stories. There have been other weird stories. I mean, I was there for the San Francisco earthquake in the World Series in the upper deck. Went to Cuba with the Orioles in '99 when we had to go through protesters to board the plane because they didn't want the Orioles to even in Miami, they didn't want the Orioles to have any contact with Cuba. And so I did have the privilege of covering a lot of, if it's sometimes not a privilege, but I did cover a lot of large stories. I was in Atlanta for the Olympic bombing because I filled in on the Olympics for one of our Olympics writers, and I was in Atlanta for that. I was actually in the park. There was still smoke hanging over the park by the time when I got from my hotel to the park and covered that story. So it's funny because in the old days, they used to call the sports department the toy department inside the newspapers because they thought all we did was go to games and didn't do any hard work. And in some cases it was true. But if you spend as much time as I did spend doing this job, and you did it at a level that, in those days, the Baltimore Sun and the Orange County Register were wealthy newspapers. They, we could go where we needed to go. We could go where we wanted to go. I look at the guys who have replaced me, and I don't know what they make, but I'm sure it's a fraction of what I was paid because I worked when the newspapers printed money. And I mean, seriously, newspapers, the average newspaper profit margin was like 23% profit on a revenue. When in my prime, at that time, those same newspapers were ripping oil companies for price gouging when the oil companies were making 6% on revenue. The world's a funny place.
Right.
But we did have some, we had we were entitled to a lot of things and I'm sure we got a sense of entitlement during those days when if there was a big story, you get a phone call that says, how soon can you get there? And you go, well, if I book this flight right now, it's going to cost $2,000. And the boss would say, I didn't ask you that. I asked you, how soon can you get there? And that was it's a mixed blessing because sometimes, my kid's having a birthday and I had to go, and the baseball beat is two sides of a coin, that had missed a lot of time at the family. I was on the beat day in, day out for about 15 years. And then I was the national baseball writer for the next 10 years. And that afforded me flexibility. So that made it a lot easier. During the time I was a national baseball writer, my son was playing high school and college baseball. And I'd been there long enough at the Sun to say, this summer, you're just going to have to work around me because I'm going to be at that kid's games. And they were good about it. And they let me do that. But the first 15 years, I mean, when my kids were little, my wife, she handled the whole thing, and I never got that panic phone call. You got to come home because I can't take it anymore. My wife was great, did a terrific job, and the kids are successful, and the grandkids are great. But there were sacrifices there that I made, and I made them willingly. And I still say that I had probably in my mind, I had like the greatest job in the world the whole time. And sometimes it was really hard. Sometimes when the LA Olympics were going on, myself and the other baseball writer in Southern California back in '84, both worked, I want to say 77, 78 days in a row. Now the Olympics only lasted about 3 weeks, but all the build up, we had to do other stuff to free the staff because the whole staff covered the Olympics. And I still remember that, we both worked like 80 days in a row. And then they announced that everybody who worked the Olympics got a big bonus, but we didn't because we didn't work the Olympics. And none of them worked 80 days in a row. They worked 22 days in a row. It was just one of those things that, I've been carrying that with me a long time. I finally got to tell it to somebody.
Right. Oh, I'm glad we could help. Wow, that's great. Peter, so I wanted to kind of come up to what brought you to Baltimore then. It's my understanding that you got to Baltimore in 1990, the year after the Why Not Orioles.
Correct.
And sort of passing in the night, Tim Kirchin from, I guess, ESPN, and also
I replaced Tim. He was the main beat writer, and when he left, they hired me.
Well, that's something.
By the way, I want to tell you, those are some pretty small shoes to fill. Timmy's about 5'6".
That's a short joke, everybody. If you know who Tim Kirkchin is.
Timmy's awesome, and he's terrific. But I've dropped that on him. He knows. I said that at the introductory Fan Fest question and answer conference with all the fans at Fan Fest. They had me and some other people up there, and I dropped that line there, and I've used it several times since. He knows it, and he'd roll his eyes at me if he heard me saying it.
Oh, that's terrific. Well, so how did all of that come about? How did you end up coming over from the West Coast to the East Coast?
Interesting. It was by accident in a sense. I had promised my wife when we got married. Before we got married, she said, "I'm not going to marry you if you don't promise me you'll never take me out of Southern California," because her whole family was there and she worked there. And so we got married, and we were married for 6 years. By '89 was 5-6 years. And I had a falling out with the Orange County Register. Simple as that. They were, for all the money they made, they did things that were cheap at times. And one of them was to order me to cover the Angels for the LA Daily News, along with covering them for them. And another reporter from the LA Daily News would cover the LA Kings for us and them. Now, what that meant was that both papers would save about $25,000, $30,000 in travel expenses. And so I originally said, no, what do I get? Well, no, we already pay you. We just send your stuff to them too. What entailed more than that, because when they had something that was relevant to that paper, they would call up and say, could you do this or do something? And so I held out a little bit, and finally they said I had been asking because of the kid situation. I had been asking to be made the national baseball writer because we needed that, and I was doing the job anyway. Because when there was a big story, we just went and did it. And so they, the editor and sports editor and the executive editor were sitting with me, and they agreed to that when the season ends, you will become the national baseball writer. So the season ends. By the time the season ends, my sports writer had gone on to another job, not with the paper. And so the executive editor was the only one. And I, came in after, doing the Earthquake World Series. And I went in and I said, okay, when do I start the national beat? And they said, you don't. We're not doing that. And I'm going like, well, the person who did the Kings, Lisa Dillman, she got a $5,000 bonus for doing that. And the executive editor said, well, why don't you call the Daily News and ask them for $5,000? And I go, we had a deal. We shook hands. We had a deal. He says, yeah, I know, but I'm just not going to do it. I just don't want to do it. And I'm just looking at him going like, what? And I said, Chris, guy's name was Chris Anderson. I said, Chris, we shook hands and I trusted you. And he started laughing. And he said, well, Pete, I guess you just learned a very tough lesson. And he asked me, no, he said, did you have it in writing? And I said, come on, Chris, you were there. We shook hands. I had your word. It was a promise. And he just started laughing. And he goes, well, Pete, I guess you just learned a real tough lesson. Now I'm busy, so I'll see you. And so I left, went back home, and it was a weird coincidence because I went back home. I was really pissed off, and I talked to my former sports editor, and he couldn't do anything about it, and he was pissed too. And he just said, hang in there or whatever. Now I don't know what he did, but within about 48 hours, I got a call from the Baltimore Sun. And even then, when I talked to the Baltimore Sun, I said, I'm not going to waste your time. I promised my wife I'd never take her out of California. And so I had that conversation from the Orange County Register offices because that's where they contacted me. They didn't have my number. And so unbeknownst to me, when I was headed home, the guy who had called me to query me on whether I was interested in the job called my house. I guess they did have my number, called my wife and talked to her because I told her my wife would never go for it, and romanced my wife on it, which I didn't know anything about. And to make this short story a lot longer, at that same time, Rick Vaughn, the PR guy for the Orioles, had got a life-size poster made up of the Orioles Why Not, and I think he had a Cal Ripken on it or a couple Orioles stars on it, but it was life-size. It was 6 feet tall, and mailed it out to everybody. It came in a manila envelope, folded out as this thing that a whole wall. I wish I still had it, actually. I don't know what happened to it. But by the time and that had come, earlier, a week or two earlier, and I looked at it and showed my wife, that's pretty cool, and folded it back up. When I got to my house, my front door opened to, it was a typical California beach community house, 1-story, 3-bedroom, not very large. And when you opened the front door, there was a wall across the hall, and then there was the kitchen on the one side and the living room on the other side. And on the wall was that poster, which said, Orioles, why not? My wife had put it up. She said, let's go. She knew how I was getting eaten up inside over this thing that I just didn't, she knew how much I didn't want to work at the Register anymore. I just didn't want to be around that guy, and I couldn't let him win. And so, there was a process after that, but I got the job and we moved, and I joined the Orioles. That was one of the mini strike years where they were, that they were postponing spring training. So I joined the Orioles at Twin Lakes Park in Sarasota, where they had the minor league players were working out. And that's where I showed up, and Frank Robinson was the manager then. And I didn't know Frank. And I had called Frank after I got the job to ask if I could come up, because he lived in Beverly Hills, so I could come up and take him to lunch. And he literally blew me off. Said, "I don't want to go to lunch with you," and hung the phone up. And I go, "Wow, this is going to be a tough year." And so I showed up at spring training, and I went up to Frank, and he was okay. He's fine, and I was the only one there. Nobody else sent anybody. And so I had Frank to myself for like a week, and we ended up being very, very close, very, being good friends later after he wasn't managing and stuff. And it's funny how sometimes things happen like that, where it started out, he's like, I got no chance. This is going to really be awful. And he was great. He helped me through the first year, and the first year in Baltimore wasn't easy. It's an adjustment, from California, especially a 3-hour time difference, because your deadline situation is so much different, especially on the road. Used to be you'd go to the East Coast and the game was over. It was only 6:30 or 7 o'clock in LA, and you could take all your time in the world to write your story. Then it becomes the opposite. There was no time. You wrote the story during the game, like the guys still do, I guess. Now once it was all internet related, it eased up some. But it was quite an adjustment. And then that winter, I was at the winter meetings, and I was walking down a hallway in the winter meetings, and I see Tommy Lasorda was holding court, which is all he did at the winter meetings, was just stand out in the lobby and hold court in these big lobbies. I can't remember whether it was Nashville or somewhere else. Most of them were in Nashville back then at the Gaylord Grand Opry Hotel. And I'm walking along, and he's talking to a bunch of seemingly important people, baseball people, and I just walked on by, and I'm about 10 feet past, and I hear very loud Tommy go, "See that guy walking off over there? That's the dumbest bleep 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 in the world."
Oh man.
He just left Seal Beach to take a job in bleeping Baltimore, and they all start laughing. And I just shake my head and just kept walking.
Oh my gosh. Hey, well, their loss is our gain here in Baltimore, and we're certainly happy that you found a home here for a long time. And I just want to move on to just a question about the Orioles, because you were here for such a long time and covered the Orioles, and with Frank Robinson, playing a lot at Memorial Stadium, and you spent some time there and spent some time at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, probably for the majority. But how did the feeling of covering a game, the atmosphere, the fan connection differ between the two venues when you were at Memorial Stadium for those years, and then when the team moved to Oriole Park at Camden Yards?
It's a good question. I'm going to take it back one step, because I also would want to point out that there's a tremendous difference between the atmosphere and the nature of the fan base in California versus Baltimore. In that, when I was working in California, there were 9 professional teams playing within 60 miles of my home. And so the Angels were just one of them, and they weren't the most important one, except in the baseball season to my paper. And so for instance, when the Rams left, it was almost like no one even noticed, as opposed to when the Browns left to go to Baltimore and the Colts left to go to Indianapolis, where those two fan bases are so passionate that there are people that still cry about that day when the moving vans moved out of Baltimore. Now, I hate to say it, I finally, a few years into my column, I finally wrote a column saying, okay, it's time to get a life here. The Ravens are here. They're a really good team. you got to let this stuff go now, and I actually got death threats on my blog, for writing that, and saying that. So, but again, I'm not from here. And so I certainly was not able to fully appreciate, the impact of that. I can say that I was at the Orioles last World Series. I did cover that World Series. It was one of 2 World Series I ever covered. I covered about 30 World Series, but 2 that you could drive back and forth between the cities, which was kind of cool, because then it was no late night airports. And once you got there, and I started out in Philly at the end of the Dodger series against the Phillies. So I was in that area. I got to be in that area for like 2 weeks, made it really easy travel wise, because it's all about me, But so, yeah, from one of the problems I had with Memorial Stadium is I thought it was a dump, because I came from, a Dodger Stadium, Anaheim Stadium. The Memorial Stadium had more character than either one of them, but it wasn't a comfortable stadium. My experiences coming, I had been coming to Memorial Stadium with the Angels for 10 years, or 8 of my 11 years. So I had seen in those days probably 75, 80 games at Memorial Stadium before I got here. And it was, but when you're in the catacombs, it's not fancy. Okay. and so, and when it's mid-August, there was no place worse to be sitting in the press box when the humidity was up. Camden Yards is different because the stadium's near water and it's positioned differently. You still have hot, humid days, but at Memorial Stadium, some of those days were just miserable. And maybe I felt it more because I was from a dry climate, but the passion of the fans was, unbelievable. And I knew pretty quick, just when I got to town, the Sun had made a rack card. The old days when they had newspaper racks where you put a quarter in, you got the newspaper, and they were all over town. And I remembered riding home from one of the first night games, and I was on St. Paul Street coming back because I hadn't learned how to use the Beltway yet. And I was coming down St. Paul Street, and there was one of those racks facing traffic on every corner, and on my face on every corner. And I literally said out loud, "We're not just in Kansas anymore." It was just so surreal. And it was late at night. I was the only car riding through town and seeing my face on every corner. And the difference between LA and here is that in LA, Orange County, I mean, there were some real hardcore Angel fans that knew who I was, but everybody here seemed to know, who I was. And it was just again, it was surreal. And for many years, I was always, and maybe it was just because I have the stupidest name in history, but for many years, even on stories that weren't about my team, I often got sent, like if I was at a Ravens game, I would be sent out into the concourse because of some big story to talk to fans. And in all the time I had to do that, many, many times I had to do that, only once had a fan refused to talk to me. Say, no, I don't want to be in the paper or whatever. Fans love to be on the sports page. They love to be quoted on the sports page. And the only time that happened was someone who was in from out of town. He had no idea. I didn't know he wasn't a Ravens fan. He was just a guy in town, went to the game. But it was kind of amazing that people read the paper here, and if I got recognized on the street, I'd always ask them, how could you recognize me? And the only way you could recognize me is because there's a little 1 by 1 inch picture of me that barely even looks like me in the paper. I think, well, I don't know, it's a picture in the paper, And so Baltimore was great for me because I, like all sports writers, have an ego. And I was able to, here I was able to have just that little bit of notoriety that's very comfortable, as opposed to I don't know what it would be like to be Shohei Ohtani walking down, if he wants to walk down a street in LA. It's the pressure of being not a real celebrity, but I could get this little bit of it where people would say, hey, yeah, I read your paper, and it felt good that people did. But it wasn't somebody stalking me. And it was very, very enjoyable. Like I said, it was a very good move for me career-wise, because in California, I would have just kept doing the same thing. And here, the importance of it to the public allowed me to advance throughout the time I was here and make a very good living here. And at a point when I left California, where it was a real struggle. I lived near the beach, and it was a real struggle to pay the bills. So that also factored into the decision to move east. And now it's funny because I remember coming here and selling my house in Seal Beach and buying a house that you could fit 3 of my houses in from Seal Beach. And times have changed now. It's not cheap here anymore.
Nope.
The house in Seal Beach that's still there at the beach is not really worth any more than the house I live in here. I mean, and it's just times change. But at that time, it was a big advantage financially to get a job on the East Coast that paid more than the job on the West Coast.
Different or writers and whatnot. I mean, there have been, as we mentioned with Tim Kirchin, some pretty phenomenal writers that have come through with Baltimore, the Baltimore Sun, covering the Orioles, including Tim, I believe Ken Rosenthal as well. I know Steve Molesky's been doing it for years, worked early on with Tim Kirchin. What do you think the lure of Baltimore was for that, and what it did for these guys' careers? Because obviously now they're in the national spotlight as well as yourself.
Well, number one, you left out Buster, and number two, you didn't take into consideration this face. I was the only one that was too ugly to get on TV. No, but those guys are great, and you're right. Timmy, wonderful guy. Junior, we call Ken Rosenthal because we always thought he looked a little like Cal, even though he was half his size. And then Buster, who was really here quite briefly. Buster had a meteoric rise. Buster was covering the Nashville Sounds out of Vanderbilt, I think. And then he got a job as a backup writer in San Diego with Padres. And then Peter Gammons took a liking to him and called Jack Gibbons, who was our sports editor, and told him this kid's on the way up. And Jack hired Buster, and by that time I was off the beat, and I was the national guy working with Buster. But Buster's terrific. All those guys were great. Baltimore's quite a breeding ground for great sports writers. Dan Shaughnessy was here first before he was a mega star journalist in Boston. Yeah. So I don't know if it's that the city made them what they are, or if the city made them leave. One of the two.
That's a good point. That's funny. I'm going to kind of guide our conversation towards like modern baseball now a little bit, Peter. So
I don't recognize it.
The pitch clock, right? The pitch clock and the rules, the new rules, particularly the pitch clock, have really sped up the pace of the game. And from a writer's perspective, question for you, has the product improved, or are you concerned that accelerated pace of play is impacting player health or the traditional flow of the game, or how has it impacted you as a writer overall?
Well, I was for a long time an if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of guy. And when Rob Manfred came along, now I've known Rob for many, many years because I covered all of that labor stuff, 94, 95. I covered in 81. I covered, when I was one of the main labor writers doing the labor reporting during that period when players weren't playing anyway. And I like Rob. But when he started out and some of the things he was proposing, my initial response was, again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I stood for a long time against the idea that it was so important to shorten the games, because I knew the only reason it was important to shorten the games is they needed to get them into a 3-hour window for TV. And that's understandable. I mean, when you look at what people are making, what they're paying the players, I now think they had to do that. But I'll say this, that I was not a beat writer when the decision was made to do that, to start really making the game shorter, doing things that would make the game shorter, which involved, changing the game pretty, significantly. And my take at the time was to say, when I was a kid going to Angel games for 75 cents, I mean, that's how old I am. The Upper Deck was 75 cents for a kid. The thing we rooted for when we were at the game was extra innings. We didn't want to leave. So we weren't a bunch of old sports writers tapping their feet wanting to get to the bar. Okay. And for that matter, we weren't a bunch of parents who wanted their kids to get back home in bed by 8:30 instead of 11:45. And so when it finally was put into place, it was pretty evident to me as an old curmudgeon that it really did improve the game. It did improve the quality of the product. It did make it easier for fans to let their kids watch the ninth inning, except in the World Series. I mean, I barely could stay awake. And so I still don't know how I feel about the the pitch clock ceases to we don't even notice it anymore. It's only been a couple of years, 2-3 years or whatever it is. We don't notice it anymore because the pitchers got into the routine of it, not being an issue. And now they don't show the clock anymore. Some of the broadcasts show the clock, and pretty soon it was no point in putting that little countdown, because the pitchers just got back into a routine that the pitchers throughout the history of baseball always worked fast. Now, I don't particularly like the 3 reliever rule. I understand that it'll save probably 15 minutes a game. I still don't like it. I think it gives an unbelievable advantage to the offensive team. I think it totally unbalances it. When you have a situation where you bring a reliever in, and if he doesn't have it, or in the case of Yennier Cano, the other team sends every left-handed. They go out. They get one of the equipment guys who hits left-handed to send up and face Yennier Cano. He cannot get left-handed guys out. And so, is it really fair? Now, I brought this up the other day with another writer, and he said, well, you're not going to have to worry about him anymore. Well, I don't know if that's true or not. Because he was wonderful a couple of years ago, but he just got to the point he was just too vulnerable. And so the idea that a manager has to put somebody in, and if the guy doesn't have it, he has to just sit back and say, well, for 2 batters, I'm going to lose this game, where I got 2 guys who are capable of getting these guys out, because it just isn't fair, because the offensive manager in that moment has any option he wants. And so, if I would say, if you're going to insist on having this 3-person rule, then I think that should freeze the opposing lineup for 3 batters. That would be my solution, but they're not going to do that. And like I said, the shortening the game did improve the product, so I can't argue with the results. I don't know what to think about about what's going to happen when they put in the pitch strike zone. Automatic strike zone. Seems like it will not be that intrusive, but the problem with it is, for me, is I still don't know. Like, when I watch a game and they put a box there so you can see where the pitches are going, you really don't know on the edges of those boxes how that relates to the hitter. And I know it'll be scientific. I know they have a way of doing it, but at the same time, basically it just goes on the hitter's height. So if a hitter crouches more or doesn't crouch at all, it doesn't matter. I mean, as far as I know, that if you had, I'm trying to think of a hitter who was an exaggerated croucher, and I can't think of one off the top of my head right now. But I would think that in some cases the strike zone would be at his chin. But the way they have it, the way they experimented with it, didn't seem like it was that big a deal at all, because whoever was going to make the decision to challenge made the decision, and they pushed a button and it just told you if he's right or wrong. Fine. It's a little too mechanized for my traditional taste, but I have seen a couple of calls in the playoffs that completely discombobulated a pitcher. A young pitcher. I don't remember which the pitcher was that. Can't remember which pitcher it was in the Toronto Seattle series, where the ball was a foot outside and the umpire just missed it, and it turned a strikeout into a walk, and then the guy gave up like 2 runs after that. Would have been the end of the inning, and then the guy gives up 2 or 3 runs. That can't happen. So this would solve that, and that's and so in that regard, I think I'm okay with it.
To kind of go, we had the press conference, I guess, on Tuesday for introducing Craig Alvarez as the new manager of the Orioles. You've been here from 90 all the way up to now for quite a few managers, from Frank and Johnny Oates, Buck to Brandon Hyde, and now Craig Alvarez. What was the overall feeling in the press conference? What are your thoughts? Kind of like the state of the Orioles as well. Do you feel this was a good move? What was his impression on everybody as well?
Well, it was the right move for Mike Elias and David Rubenstein, which is all that's really important at the moment. And I spent the last few weeks kind of pondering all the people that it could possibly be, and then kind of got the fact that it wasn't going to be any of those people, because I've been around a long time, and I respect the old time managers. I expect the medium time managers like Bob Melvin, and I think you could trot out any one of them, and the team will adapt to them, and they'll adapt to the team. But it's pretty obvious that Mike Elias proved from the start, when he hired Brandon Hyde, that he wanted a bit of a blank canvas to work with. He wanted a manager that number one, wants the job, and also is going to be open to all the analytical things that Mike Elias is going to want to do with his staff. And so it becomes important that he hire another, for lack of a better term, another Brandon Hyde, in a sense. And that's fine. And this guy is a very respected guy, and he seems like he's a really good guy. A younger, keeping the guys at least in their early 40s or younger probably works better with a team that's this young. I think the days of trotting out a 74-year-old Tony La Russa or Jack McKeon, I think those days are gone forever. I mean, I would love to see my friend Mike Scioscia get one more job, but he's 70 years old. He doesn't look 70, but he is. So I don't see that kind of thing happening again or much again. And so, like I said, the guy made a great first impression. He does have a coaching track record that doesn't involve a tremendous amount of experience, but the climb he made is logical, and so and the associations he made. When I heard that it was a guy from Cleveland who started his career as a coach in Tampa Bay, I said, yeah, that's going to be the guy, because Tampa Bay, I don't know how they do it, but they know how to do it. And so this is a team that wants to be a richer version of the Tampa Bay Rays. And so this guy knows how that works. Then he worked for the Giants, was a good organization, and the Indians. And Stephen Vogt is, he had a great manager and friend to learn from for the last couple of years, as he moved into from kind of a bench coach to associate manager, which I assume are the same thing. But I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes. I think that that wasn't the same team this year that the previous years. I realized they didn't play that well in the second half of 94. But it is a team with a ton of talent, and I see they've moved some of the hitting coaches out, and I feel bad for anybody who gets fired, of course. But I have to say that been bouncing this off of people for months. What happened to some of these guys who look so good as rookies and second-year players? What happened to what they were doing? And all I can think about, and it's been suggested to me from outside, is launch angle. If you watch the Toronto Blue Jays, and at that press conference, I asked Mike Elias. I didn't mention launch angle, but I asked Mike Elias, is there anything about the way the Toronto Blue Jays went about that World Series that you can take something from? Well, I would say myself, all the level swings that either hit home runs or hit balls off the fence and caused amazing and led to one of the most exciting World Series I've ever seen.
Amazing.
And so
yeah.
I think you got to get the Colton Cowsers of the world to stop trying to hit the ball 600 feet and learn to do what Ernie Clements did. One of the most impressive World Series performances. No, I never heard of the guy. Most impressive World Series performances I've ever seen. That guy, I was watching the games at home with my wife and my daughter, and every time he came up, I kept saying, that guy doesn't know how to not hit. And I'm sort of using the Orioles as an example. They know how to not hit right now. And this guy doesn't. Everything he did was a bloop.
There were several times in my life.
And
there's several times in my life where I never knew how to hit. So I'm the opposite of that guy.
Right. I know the feeling, but there was a lesson to be learned there. And I'm sure, I know all the players watched the World Series, and I've got to think some guys like, Colton Cowser and some of the other young guys there have got to have noticed it wasn't subtle how level the swings were. And that included Vladimir Guerrero. Every once in a while, Vladimir would tee off. It'll be on a low pitch where you would have to lift the ball. But all these guys who are hitting line drives on high fastballs and attacking high fastballs from the best high fastballs in the business. And it was very impressive how Toronto competed against Yamamoto and Blake Snell. I mean, I don't know what Blake Snell's going to come back next year, because he got knocked around. I mean, he got his aura of invincibility punctured big time. And other people, I'm sure, will be looking at films of how they did that. And it'll make it a little more harder for him, next year for the 40 games that he's available.
Well, I think you floated recently in one of your articles on BaltimoreBaseball.com the idea of the Orioles pursuing Bo Bichette. Speaking of that Toronto Blue Jays series and a young man who had put the ball in play an awful lot this year. And Jason and I have been talking on the podcast a lot about getting some guys who get on base, just getting traffic on the base pass for this team ahead of guys who can hit the ball out of the ballpark, because you need some balance in your lineup. So, when you look at the position player excess, is it time for the Orioles to treat, one of these top prospects like Mayo or Basayo as some currency to acquire some via the trade, like a guy like Arias or Stephen Kwan, or go out in free agency and sign a guy like Bo Bichette who can get on base and hit for average?
Well, I don't think Mike Elias is going to trade Samuel Basayo for anybody, but and I don't think that Kobe Mayo gets. Unfortunately, Kobe's been exposed, at least up to now, and he hit really well in September, and that's fine. But he, like Ryan Mountcastle, is not going to have a tremendous amount of. You're not going to get a premier, what I call a $300 million player for those guys, one or both of them. But as David Rubenstein said, he said, we have no particular restraints financially. So the question I didn't get in, they ran out of questions, was I wanted to ask David Rubenstein just to say, could you ever imagine yourself paying $300 million for a player? Because that would be the answer. That question would tell us a lot. And so I mean, Rock Kabatko and I are going back and forth on Facebook because he keeps saying you're crazy. Where are you going to play the guy? Gunner's the shortstop. And I'm going like, you give me the best pure hitter in Major League Baseball, I'll find a place for him. Now, it might be shortstop, and Gunner might end up being Manny Machado and getting a platinum glove at third base. And maybe Jordan Westburg has to be rotated as a DH around second, short, and third. It could all be done. But the question is, number one, would that guy come here? Number two, would they pay the money for him to come here? Number three, will the Blue Jays bid enough so it won't be an issue in the next week? And my only thing, I said when Rocco and our buddies, and so he keeps going back at me, and I finally wrote back to him. I said, the headline of the story said, it may sound crazy. Okay. I know it's not likely, but someone of that caliber, and there aren't many that are of that caliber, they need a right-handed hitter that you can put in the middle of the lineup who, if you got a guy in third base, that run's coming home with one out, with less than 2 outs. That's good. And the Orioles didn't have those kind of guys. And I wouldn't be telling them anything they don't already know. But if a Bo Bichette wanted to come to Baltimore, and I don't know why he would, or if there's, or if that level of money wasn't coming from anywhere else. I mean, at some point, if you want to go to the World Series, you got to get in the game. And that doesn't mean $1 billion payroll, but it might mean having to suck it up and make the world forget that you screwed up with Albert Bell, and you screwed up with our big hitting home
Chris
run
Davis.
hitter. Yeah, Chris Davis. And listen, who could have foreseen that? He was the Major League home run king twice in a row. Who foreseen that the minute he got the money, he either forgot how to play or lost his incentive to play? One of the two. That was the most mysterious thing I've ever seen. And I like Chris; he's a good guy, but something happened there that defies explanation. So
Great. And just to piggyback on what Mike said, not like for me, it's not only guys that get on base, but tough out. And guys that are also have some sort of a veteran presence that have been there before. And because I would argue that from the playoff team in 23 upwards to the last playoff appearance, they didn't have that in their lineup. I mean, they had Gunner, and I mean, Aaron Hicks, I believe, was probably one of their best hitters in 23 in the playoffs.
mm-hmm.
So we don't have that, or the O's do not have that now. So getting guys, I'm thinking, obviously, this is the higher end of the market. Schwarber, Bregman, Bichette, like you said. Kyle Tucker would, obviously, he's going to be the big spender this one. But I'm not sure here, Pete, if they can, what does your gut say? Will they be shopping at the top, or will they be just getting a couple guys in that mid-tier range?
I'm guessing they'll be shopping mostly in the middle. I hope they're I don't have a problem with getting guys that are in the middle if they're good players. But it's tough for the fans to, pick up the paper the day after, the day after the managerial press conference, and that they signed Leote. And at this moment, I'm blanking on his last name, but this is the guy who is Jorge Mateo, without the flair. And he's a guy who can steal bases, play center field, and hits 220. And so, I would prefer Jorge Mateo because he's a no-brainer stolen base, and this guy isn't. But they didn't want to pay Jorge Mateo $5.5 million, or what he would get in arbitration. And so we'll see. I mean, we'll see what they do. And sometimes Mike Elias will do stuff that makes you scratch your head, and it works out great, and sometimes it doesn't. And so I'm curious if I really believe that David Rubenstein is pretty much keeping Mike Elias in his position as the guy making those decisions, and him enabling those decisions to be made. Sometimes, and I like Mike, and I think he's done a fantastic job here. But sometimes I think he takes a tremendous amount of pride in analytically finding that guy that doesn't cost a lot of money, but contributes. And I think they just need. I don't think they need 5 guys. I think they do need 5. They need a lot of relievers and some guys to fill out stuff. But I mean, as far as the lineup and being a great offense, factor in good health, and you always hope that'll happen, and you don't know. Factor in good health. You still need to inject someone in the middle of that lineup that it is this, for the lack of a better term, the straw that stirs the drink. And I think they kept mentioning that Jordan Westburg was that guy. He's the guy, and no, he isn't. I love Jordan Westburg. He could be that guy, but he's not that guy. And you can't just project to him and say, well, he's that guy, so that's going to happen. I think he's a very good player, and I think he's going to be healthy next year, and I think he's going to do really good things, but he's not that guy. And so Bo Bichette was an obvious thing for me to write about, just because the readers could read about him and they could see him every night. So he's right in front of them instead of pulling out a Schwarber or somebody like that that's already gone for this year. And I'd love it if they did that, but it is a little crazy. They're not going to do that.
Well, I love where your head is, Peter. And if I were running the team, I think that's a great idea, but I'm not, because I'm just a lowly phys ed teacher. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about where you think the priority lies this offseason, because there's been a lot of talk about our starting rotation. Trevor Rogers had an amazing second half of the season last year. There's promise in September with Kyle Bradish coming back to the rotation. So you have some building blocks there in the starting rotation. Jason and I have discussed a bunch of pitchers that would be available, some attached to qualifying offers, some not. And then we've talked about the bullpen, and you've talked about that briefly, having some number issues in the bullpen that they need to take care of. And then we talked about a bopper or somebody the straw that stirs the drink in the center of the lineup. Where does the priority lie for the Orioles? If you were to pick the first area of need they need to address from those 3, which one would it be?
Well, at the moment it have to be the bullpen. That they can't go into next year and keep plucking guys out of Norfolk to see if they can do it. And if they want to get to deep into the playoffs, you can't do it with a musical chairs bullpen. So that should be a very, very high priority. I only say that because they really do it, barring 7 pitching injuries, serious pitching injuries. They probably can assemble a rotation out of what they have. Now, would it be anything like the Dodger rotation or even the Blue Jays rotation? No, it wouldn't. But they do have 3 or 4 guys who are pretty good pitchers, and they have 2 or 3 guys in the wings that have a chance to become something. But the fact is that for 2 years they lost almost the equivalent of a whole starting rotation to injury. So they can't assume that won't happen again. I would assume it based on probability, just because how could it happen 3 years in a row? But the fact is it happened 2 years in a row, and some of these are the same guys who were hurt. And so, if you have Trevor Rogers and he's that guy that he was for the last couple months, and you have Dean Kremer who only is that guy for the last 2 months generally, but you think the ability's there, and you have a couple of enough guys. You have enough guys to fill things out. You're not going to keep. God, I'm just blanking. I was up too late last night. But they're not going to re-sign. Gosh, guy I'm having. You know what? I am 70 years old. I'm just dropping out of. I usually keep a roster next to me, but name me the rotation.
Thinking of.
Huh?
When you said not sign back, were you referring to Zach Eflin, maybe?
Yes, that's who I'm referring to. And and he's no sure thing. I mean, you look at Suarez and say, hey, he could be a decent swing guy, an emergency guy. And they have a couple of the guys, Chase and Povich, and those guys they're developing. Are they going to be good? I don't know. But they really need they always seem to sign somebody like Kyle Gibson, and that's just not going to do it. Even though he did the first time, it hadn't been a great signing, but they can't keep playing at half stepping and gambling on players and hoping that they come through in a big way. If they want to really compete in the American League East the way they did 2 years ago when a lot of young players just played out of their minds, then they've got to help those guys. And having veteran guy, having another veteran guy in the rotation who's a quality guy, having another veteran guy in the starting lineup who's a high quality guy, doesn't take more than two or three of those guys. You're not going to rebuild the whole team. You got a ton of young talent. So I fully expect Gunnar will have a better season next year than he had this year. Colton Cowser couldn't not have a better season than he had this year. I don't know what's going to happen with Mountcastle. I don't know I don't know what they're planning to do with him and whether he'll be back at all. But they just have, and Westberg, Westberg, the question now will be, can he stay healthy? There's no question in my mind about his ability. When you watch him play when he's right, he is a guy who someday could be a Bo Bichette type guy, and not even that far off if he's able to stay healthy. But until that happens, this team, I think the team has enough raw talent to have better luck next year injury wise and be a playoff team. But we're not really talking about playing in the first round of the playoffs. I mean, you got to be building towards something more than that. And so that's I don't know who that entails. I mean, I don't know that anybody knows who that entails, but they can't just say, we got a bunch of good guys who'll be healthy next year. Let's go. That would be a disservice to their new manager too.
I'm going to choose to be optimistic. I've been saying this for a little while now because I do think that even though it's not going to come out publicly that Elias is under any sort of, I guess he's under fire or anything like that, because I don't think he is, but I do think that he may internally feel some pressure. And I know around Major League Baseball, there were some rumors that there are some general managers that question whether he can develop a team at the major league level, if he can put together an actual major league team, or if it's just a minor league team. Now, I don't know the truth to all of those, but those are some grumblings that have been. So
Well,
I think that maybe he feels the pressure to make those.
I don't doubt that. I think he probably feels pressure no matter what. I think these guys are highly competitive people. And Mike came up here with the reputation of being able to develop to draft and develop young players, and he has done that. That's the hard part. Buying a player who's already good is not a difficult thing if you have the money. There used to be a Steve Martin routine when he did stand-up comedy where he'd walk out on stage and say, you can be a millionaire and never pay taxes. And then he'd pause and he goes, so you asked me, Steve, how can I be a millionaire and never pay taxes? He goes, well, first you get $1 million. You guys don't get 80s humor, do you?
Oh my gosh. No, I don't.
Steve Martin's great, though. Steve Martin's amazing.
That having the guy already is not. You don't have to develop Bo Bichette. You just have to pay him, which that's the easy part if you have the money and you want to spend it. But developing Sammy Basayo, they brought him along. It seems like they've done a great job with him, but the advanced scouting figured him out pretty quick after he got off to a really good start. I mean, that's just normal. And so I don't expect him to hit 300 and hit 35 home runs next year. I bet he will if he stays healthy. It's a big guy. It'll be harder to stay healthy if you're a big guy like that. But I think he's a great talent. But the development of him and getting him here pretty quickly is a testament to what Mike Elias and his staff do well. But as of now, their ability to get the perfect guy for certain situations has not been evident. But under the old ownership, I'm pretty sure I know why. So they brought him here because he showed that he could put together a team of very, very low cost, high quality talent. But then you got to do the next step. And now we're here at the next step, and we'll see.
We've taken up a lot of your time today, and we, again, are very appreciative. But I do have one last question.
Mm-hmm.
I obviously, over the years, you have interviewed and had to deal ins and outs with lots of players and managers. If you could choose one that was your favorite to cover over the years, and it can be Baltimore related or national or one of each, who would that be? Who's your favorite player or manager to cover?
This will surprise you, but my favorite manager to cover, I liked almost all the managers. I got along well with all the managers because I think one quality I had was never projecting that I knew more than they did, because I obviously don't. And I think that when I covered the Angels, Gene Mock, who was the greatest manager that never won, that's the wrap on him. Should have won in '86. Should have won in '82. But I had a special relationship with him, and it almost was it was almost like I almost like I viewed him as a father figure. And I grew up without a father. My dad left before I can remember. I mean, I knew him, but he left the family before I can even remember. And something about Gene kind of got me, and I got him, where he did not get along with a lot of media. And he did not have much patience for a lot of media. And I think he sensed, because I was relatively young still when he was the manager. I was in my fifth or sixth year. I think he sensed that I really wanted to learn from him, not just criticize him for not winning in Philadelphia. And so we developed a relationship where the day before an off day, when he knew he, like Buck Showalter, knew everything about what we did. He made it his business. Buck was like that too. Buck knew exactly how you worked, why you worked, what you were doing. And so Gene could tell when I was walking around by the batting cage that I didn't have an off day story yet. And then he'd call me over. He was hitting ground balls, and he'd never look at me. And he'd go, a young writer would look really, really smart if you went and looked up this and then applied it to our team. And I'd go up and look it up and go, oh, it's something, in those days. Now, all that information now is not special, because now we watch the games and some guy goes, that's only the 8th time a guy has had has had 2 singles in succession on a day in October, on a day number 15 in October. Some of this stuff gets really sing-song and old. They keep bringing up these little known things and going, this has ever happened in Major League history. Well, that's because it's a total fluke. It's not because the guy who did it is this special talent. If anything had to do with special talent, has already been done in Major League Baseball, except 5 home runs in a game. Anything. But, they'll come up with this thing, and by parsing that it happened in the 6th inning on a Thursday, and, this hasn't happened on the 6th inning on a Thursday since 1912. So what? We've really gotten into the weeds, but in those days, Gene Mock knew all that stuff, and he didn't have a computer to look it up on. He just made it his business to know. And he helped me a lot, and so I always liked him. And when he went on to help out Bob Boone at Kansas City, I always got to spend time with him there when I was still on day-to-day baseball. and he died too young, not young, but too young, of lung cancer because he's one of those guys from the old days, always had a cigarette. So, but listen, every manager has his own personality. I enjoyed covering Tommy Lasorda just because he was entertaining. He was a clown. He's fun to cover. He'd do weird, stupid things in his office, and you'd get in fights with him, but it was always cartoonish, and it was fun. Give you one last anecdote. It's one of my favorites. Sometimes you know how you never get that shrimp truck moment like George Costanza. I was covering the Dodgers, and Tommy had all these actors. He had Frank Sinatra sitting in the corner of his office every night, and he had all these actors, Ernest Borgnine, and all these guys you probably never heard of now, but well-known actors, Jack Lemmon. You met them, all those, Don Rickles. Don Rickles made fun of me in the dugout every day because my last name was Schmuck. I mean, every time he saw me. And I was honored. Don Rickles is making fun of me. Okay. So Tommy was in the minor leagues forever. He had 4 decisions with the Boys of Summer Dodgers. He was 0-4. It's the only major league experience he had. Then he was a coach for the Dodgers for the next 20 some years, and he ends up being the Dodger manager. But in all those 20 years, at every level, he was the guy that threw left-handed batting practice. So his hands were just gnarly from all the stuff he had to do. And I'm not sure if you pitch both ways because both hands had really heavy arthritis. And so his hands were crooked like this. I don't know. There you go. And so he also liked, if he saw something paper he didn't like, he always liked to dress you down in front of somebody. And, he liked to put on a show. So Tommy calls me in. I don't remember what the story was, but he just explodes. And there's Frank Sinatra sitting in the corner. And it's kind of embarrassing. I never met him. He was kind of what he was even there. You didn't approach him. He just sat over there. It was almost weird. And Tommy comes around his desk and he is in my face like this, and yelling. And finally I stop him. Tommy, stop. He goes, what? I go, if you're so mad at me, why are you pointing at Frank? And he just stopped him in his tracks. And then he went, man, Pete, that is so Bush League. I'm taking advantage of making fun of an old man's arthritis. And I go, Tommy, it's real simple. If you embarrass me, I'm going to embarrass you. I said, I liked him. I got along fine with him, but it was like, I'll let you do that, but you got to take a little bit back, and he did most of the time, but that was my moment, where I got to drop that line on him. So
that's terrific.
It was fun.
Oh, Peter, these are great stories. I mean, I could do this. I could listen to you talk all day long about this. This is great. But we are out of time here. I do want to give you the opportunity to let everyone know where they can find you nowadays still. What else you're doing?
Well, I'm not doing a whole lot other than the occasional podcast or radio pop on the local BAL and 105.7. But I do work. I do have a sort of mini job with BaltimoreBaseball.com. So that's a free site. Fans can go there anytime. I only write a few days a month. I am retired, so I like to have lots of leisure time. Now I'm into football, man. I'm watching the Ravens and, not doing any writing about it, just settling in and getting into the NFL season.
Fantastic. Well, that is going to do it for us today with Dad Bods, Crabcakes, and Sports. For Peter Schmuck and Mike Frisky, I'm Jason Weisbecker, and we'll see you all next time.
Don't forget to subscribe to Dad Bods, Crabcakes, and Sports on Red Circle, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, or wherever you get your free podcasts. And while you're at it, leave us a review. It really helps us out. We're trying to spread the good word about Baltimore sports far and wide. Follow us on social media for more behind-the-scenes actions, memes, and bad sports takes. You can find us at Bods, Crabcakes, and Sports on Instagram, and Bods, Crabcakes, and Sports on our Facebook page. Until next time, keep rocking those Bods, eating those crab cakes, and never miss the game.